I'm afraid. She's very unwell. She's suffering from a life-threatening condition called sepsis. So she has many definitions. I think of it broadly, as when the body's response to an infection is so severe that the response itself starts to do the harm, the whole body becomes inflamed, the immune system starts to damage the organs. It's serious and it can be really hard to treat. Now what this media attention prompted 3 doctors, all experts in sepsis treatment, to write a letter to the prestigious medical journal The Lancet, and the title of their letter was Sepsis Hysteria, Excess Hype and Unrealistic Expectations. The piece was widely shared on social media. It had the hashtag sepsis hysteria, and the debate became quickly polarized. On the one side you had claiming that the messaging around sepsis was distorting facts and creating this unhealthy climate of fear and retribution. And on the other side, you had charities who have been involved in raising awareness and patients who've been tragically affected by the worst outcomes of sepsis. So, what's the truth? Well, 2 recent studies have analyzed hundreds of articles about sepsis from the most circulated newspapers in the UK. Lynn Rush is the lead author of both studies, and she's a public health doctor based at the University of Glasgow. When will it work? Closely at these articles, we found that a disproportionate number were about sepsis in children, often quite alarmist tone. So many reports of children who seemed to have no more than a tummy bug, but quickly became very unwell with little warning. There was also a strong focus on feelings by the health service. So the tone is almost that the most trivial problem in any child could become rapidly life-threatening in a way that frequently health services make mistakes about. That's the general tone. And even some of the line language used saw the most was common phrase we found was silent killer, which obviously seems designed to cause alarm. And what proportion of all the articles you looked at were actually about children who died? Well, actually, it's 45%. So, almost half of the articles about sepsis focused on deaths or serious illness in children. 45%, yeah, but I think reporting of sepsis in this way presents a very, very skewed picture. We'll try and pick. This is GP Margaret McCartney. Margaret, almost half the articles. Does that reflect reality? It doesn't. When we compare to what actually happens in the real world. So, letter in The Lancet published recently had estimated that about 150 children per year die of sepsis. No, every one of those deaths is a tragedy. Absolutely. In perspective, we know that about 50,000 people die every year from sepsis. Oh, we're looking at 150 deaths in children out of 50,000 total death, something like that. Which means that about 0.3% of sepsis deaths are in children. So if you went by newspaper reports, you might believe that almost 50% of deaths were in children, which I think that does feel like what I read in the press, versus if you look at the actual statistics, it's less than 1%. Yeah. Now, compare that to the elderly. 3/4 of deaths from sepsis are in the over 75s, and that's not in any way was reflected in pressure. That's not the proportion that we see in the media. So my concern is that there's a disconnect between what we're seeing in the media and what is actually happening in real life. Now, it's absolutely correct that people are concerned for their children. Nobody wants to have anyone that comes to any harm unnecessarily. One of the issues that we have in something like this, as we don't really count the anxiety that is often driven by well-meaning awareness type of campaigns. We looked at articles spanning 30 years. There seemed to be a point in time for the tone changed. So articles from some of the earlier stages of the study tended to present something that was very rare and very unfortunate. It's something that really couldn't be avoided. Well-related articles seemed to focus on feelings by health professionals and presented the something that, really should be avoidable. And what was the timing of that change of tone from very unfortunate but very rare to increasingly common and somebody's fault? So it seems as though the change in tone was from about of 2014, 2015 on, and that's when we saw an increase in reports of cases of services. A lot of this awareness raising has been done by a charity called the Sepsis Trust. It was set up in 2012, in the absence of any other advocacy group, and its founder is Ron Daniels. This is a delicate balancing act, isn't it? We're raising awareness among the public. But the last thing we want is to flood already beleaguered emergency departments and GP surgeries. He's with the worried. Well, and it is true that we cannot save every person from sepsis in 2019. The Health Secretary Mass Hancock tweeted sepsis kills over 52,000 every year, each death a preventable tragedy. I lost Ron Daniels about how many of those deaths were actually avoidable. Sepsis can sometimes affect the very young sick neonate. It can very commonly affect the very elderly and those patients, their physiology. Immune systems might be such that we simply cannot save them even with the best medical care, but in the middle are some thousands of people whose lives can be saved through earlier detection and earlier management. So we think there are somewhere, and we don't have as good data on this as we should. But it's somewhere around 50,000 deaths a year in England, probably in the UK. It's a similar number. How many of these at the moment do we think are avoidable? The reality is, we don't know for certain, but my best estimate is that between 5,000 and 8,000 more lives can be saved every year. If we as a system, that's not only the NHS, but also the public and the media and public awareness, improve to be among the best in the world. And is it possible to predict with any accuracy